everyone, and welcome back to the Earth to the Moon podcast. I'm Andy.
And I'm Elton.
And we're here to talk to you some more about the fantastic HBO series From the Earth to the Moon, which deals with that.
Going to the moon.
It's a very self-explanatory podcast, if we're honest. You know, it kind of just does it does exactly what it says on the tin.
Oh, you went there, man.
I went
already.
There. So it's a Von Seal cast, mate. Oh. So this is actually the second episode of the cast. If you haven't already seen it, if you go to rogue2.com /Apollo 13.
I would say so, yeah.
We've already covered the film Apollo 13, which served as a springboard to the series. So if you go off, you can listen to that and hear our thoughts about that film. But this is the first look at the series proper, the first episode.
That's right.
Which I believe is called Can We Do This?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Yes. Much better than the first suggestion of Can We Fix It?
And then in brackets, yes, we can.
Yes. So it's a little Bob the Builder humour for everyone there who is like 6.
Jesus.
I know. So is this your first time seeing this, or have you... Because we weren't sure if you'd seen the series before we started doing this.
Right. I have now seen this episode twice that I know of. I think way back in the day when it was first on, let's say, Sky or HBO or whenever it was released, some bits of it register with me.
Mm-hmm.
But you might as well just turn around and say, no, this is my first viewing.
So just as a very brief kind of general overview of thoughts, what did you think of our first visit here?
I thought this was fabulous. I thought it was really well laid out. It simplifies everything that they're doing from the Mercury right up until Apollo. Mm-hmm. And it's all like a layman's view of what they're actually doing and when things go wrong, isn't it?
It's kind of a Cliff Notes version, really, isn't it? It's just a little sprinkling of Project Mercury, a little sprinkling of Gemini, and just the beginnings of talks about Apollo, really, isn't it?
And names that we know as well, and some names we don't know and are not really familiar with. And it's just, it's a nice, easy, gradual way into the space program.
Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do a bit different here to how we did, say, the Band of Brothers podcast. We're not going to do a blow-by-blow here.
Or try our best not to, anyway.
We're going to try our best not to do a blow-by-blow here. But there's a few bits and pieces we want to kind of touch on and introduce you to stuff. Please send us feedback on the Facebook group, which is facebook.com /groups from the Earth to the Moon. Just search for it. But what we're going to do is we're going to pull out little bits, little morsels that we find interesting to talk about a little bit and just kind of see where the conversation goes. But please feedback. Let us know if you like this or if you prefer a blow-by-blow, or if you want us to just shut up. We won't, but you can ask. All feedback is good. It lets us know people are listening.
Exactly, yeah.
So in much the same way Band of Brothers starts, we start with a narration, but this time it's with Tom Hanks, who is kind of setting the scene for the episode.
That's right, yeah. It's not by an unknown soldier that we find out 10 weeks later.
Yeah, it's clear from the get-go this is just Tom Hanks. What I like is it's kind of these abstract images of a sculpture. Do you know what it is?
I'm not too sure what it is. It took me a little while to actually work out the way it pans and crossfades. Mm-hmm. Kind of takes a little while, and it's only until he steps right into the foreground and it's in the background that you can see it. But I'm not quite aware of what it's meant to be.
Well, I think you're aware that Apollo is the one of the Olympic deities from classical Greek. What would you call it? The pantheon of the Greek gods.
Right.
And I believe he was the god of the sun. And what would happen is he would ride his chariot and he would pull the sun up into the sky. Mm-hmm. So that is a sculpture depicting Apollo in his chariot.
Nice.
Yes, quite apt given the name of Project Apollo. They also feature in the badge for Apollo 13. You see the horses?
Oh yes, yeah, I remember that. Yep.
Yeah. So So yeah, I just think that's kind of an interesting. It's very nicely kind of framed and set up.
Cool.
Now, this episode is divided into chapters, isn't it?
Yeah, we have a number of chapters, and I've written them all down. How many chapters do we have on this? Maybe 6 chapters in this.
Okay, and basically each chapter, this episode really is bringing someone who has never heard about the space race, never heard about Project Apollo, never heard of NASA. It's kind of just bringing them up to speed. So going into the next episode, we're all on a base level of knowledge of how they came to be here.
Yeah, I don't want to dumb it down a little bit, but it's very family friendly so any age can really get into this.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important as well, because you can get really super technical into all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and there's films and stuff to go into that. There's an entire film just about the Project Mercury missions called The Right Stuff. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't, no.
Oh, I think possibly a bonus at the end of this episode, we might do The Right Stuff. Or maybe we can get that on the Black Dog. But that is a film about the Mercury astronauts and the first missions into space there.
Right.
But yeah, the first chapter really is kind of just laying the groundwork that there's a space race with the Russians and America is losing.
Yeah, the Russians have already beaten them though, haven't they?
Pretty much. They were the first to get... okay, so let's go back a little bit further to the end of World War II. The Germans were leading the way with rocket technology, with the V2 rockets.
Yeah.
And under the direction of Wernher von Braun. Now, at the end of the war, under Operation Paperclip, the Americans went in and scooped up all of the German scientists they could get their hands on, the rocket scientists, and effectively gave them clemency and, citizenship and everything to come over and provide the Americans with missile technology. And the Russians went in and picked up basically whatever they missed.
Yeah.
So they kind of split. Now, the American kind of got the cream of the crop. The Russians got the second. I don't want to sound disparaging and say second tier, but they didn't have Wernher von Braun and the top ones of the projects. But they were able.
They were collecting stickers and shiny cards. The ones the Americans got were all the shiny little foil cards, weren't they?
Oh yeah, exactly. But what happened is the Russians put a lot more emphasis on this technology. They felt they had to catch up quicker, and they saw the PR benefits of being first.
Do you think this was America getting all the cream of the crop and sitting back and going, okay, well, whatever we're in the battle for, we won already because we got these guys, we got the A-team here, and so we can rest on our laurels, so to speak, and do it at our own pace. Whereas Russia are like, no, we need to catch up, and in doing so, take the lead.
I think to a certain extent that is true. What I'll tell you all is there was a fantastic series the BBC did a few years ago called Space Race. Mm-hmm. And that documents purely the very beginnings of the space race from 1944 with the German rockets up until like 1969 really, and the first landing on the moon. But what's interesting here is it's dealing with the Soviet and the American side.
Yeah.
So you can see, and much like this, it's a docudrama. It's a dramatized version of actual history. It's really good. It goes into a lot of the stuff with Sergei Korolev and the competition between him and Wernher von Braun in America. So that's a very good series. And if you're interested in any of this stuff, things like Sputnik, Project Vostok, which was the Soviet program to put the first men in the moon, first men into orbit, and stuff like that, I think that's definitely worth going and having a look at. It was really, really good. I don't know if you ever saw that when it was on.
No, I didn't know.
Okay, well, we'll stick it on some point down the line list to have
Another
a look at.
thing for me to watch.
It's becoming the Educating Elton podcast.
It is, yeah, man. It's this list is just getting longer and longer and longer.
But I will say this: it is a fantastic series, and it's very informative because a lot of people know about Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. And a few people might know about Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, but everything around that, they don't know. For example, with the Soviet Vostok capsules, which they launched up, and I saw these at the Science Museum a couple of years ago. Yeah. They had an exhibit, and it was really fascinating. The capsule itself was barely big enough to fit a man in. And when it was coming into land, they hadn't quite figured out how to do the soft landings. So the cosmonaut had to jump out once it had entered the atmosphere and descend on his own parachute.
Sod that.
You've got to be pretty crazy to get in this thing in the first place, but it's a special kind of crazy to go and do that afterwards.
Well, I suppose if you're at the point where you know where this big metal room is going to hit the floor and you'll just be a kind of ready brown paste at the bottom, if you're given the chance to jump out of it, yeah, I suppose you kind of would, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's like, I'm done, I'm out, thank you, goodbye. Yeah. Check, please. So the beginning of this episode, it has some of the president's scientific advisors. One's played by Al Franken. Did you say you had some names of people who were there?
Hang on. Where are we? Are we talking about the Freedom 7? No, we're not, are we?
No, we're talking about the meeting at the beginning, just to set the pace, because we have a few important people. I know we have James Webb. James Webb was the NASA administrator at the time.
Yep.
And you might recognize the name because there's a big space telescope which is going to replace Hubble, being launched, I think, this year, maybe early next year.
Yep.
And that is called the James Webb Space Telescope in honor of him.
Yeah.
There's also Hugh Dryden.
Chris Kraft was there as well, wasn't he?
I think so.
The flight director on Freedom 7.
I think so. But this was just a meeting where they've just received the news that they've lost, effectively. The Soviets have gotten the first... this was talking about the first man in space, wasn't it? Yeah.
They'd already got up to space and orbited it, haven't they?
Yeah. So the Russians launched Yuri Gagarin in a Vostok 1. And not only did they launch him into space, he was launched into orbit. And if you remember from our discussion on the Derelict from last week, getting into space is a very different trick to getting into orbit.
That's right, yeah.
Now, Freedom 7, the first Mercury, which launched, I believe, 3 months later.
May the 5th, 1961.
1961. That was only able to go into space, not into orbit. So it stuck its nose out and then it popped it back down. Because did you see the Mercury mission control?
Yes, I did, yeah.
This is before Houston. So this mission control was actually in Florida.
Yeah.
But it doesn't even have the big backlit illuminator. It's got a little model that kind of just wheels along the board.
I love that little model. I think it's brilliant. And it's got the retro rockets underneath as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, the retro rocket pack. It's one step removed from the WAFs moving the checkerboards from Battle of Britain, effectively.
There's a tiny little child behind that with a big magnet just pulling it along ever so slightly. And then he's slapped around the head and told, rotate it.
Yes, rotate. So yeah, that kind of introduces us very briefly to Mercury. They've finally gotten a man into space, but not into orbit. And again, this is just kind of laying the sense that they are behind and they're just struggling to catch up. So they say, look, if we just get into trying to keep pace, we're just never going to do it. If we want to beat the Russians, we have to aim for the moon.
Yeah.
And then there's a very telling point where the character Al Franken is portraying. I'm going to find the name of who he is meant to be because it's bugging me now.
Okay. Can I just ask you about the first Mercury program flight?
Yes.
Because it is Alan Shepard on board, isn't it?
It's Alan Shepard on... it's called a Mercury Redstone. So Mercury is the capsule itself.
Yep.
The Redstone is the missile. I use the term missile and not rocket because it was basically a ballistic missile and they took the warhead off and put a capsule on it.
Put a man on it instead.
Yes. What could possibly go wrong?
What did you think of that scene? Because the launch looked a little Thunderbirdsy, but from the kids' TV, the relaunch of Thunderbirds a couple of years ago, which I suppose at the time probably looked really bloody good. It looks a little dated, but I thought that it looked good for its age.
The launch looked good for its age, but I'm not sure that's not actually a piece of footage from The Right Stuff. I've not watched it in a while, so I'd need to go and look again, but I think they might have taken that footage from the right stuff.
Really?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
And one of the reasons I say that is some of the CG later in this episode is decidedly more flaky.
Oh.
But we'll get to that.
Okay. Okay, can I just say one word about that?
You may.
Are we talking about Buzz?
Possibly.
Okay,
Possibly.
good.
Probably.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad we're on the same sort of page with that.
Yeah, it was just a little bit. Ooh, that's yeah.
Yeah, but
okay.
Did they do some model work on this? It looks like model work. Once
yes.
he's up in space, it looks really good.
I think it's a combination of model work and CG, and the only times they're using CG is instances where it would be difficult to use model work.
Right.
The character Al Franken is playing is Jerome Wisner, who was President Kennedy's science advisor. And he makes the point that if they go to the moon, the only thing they're going to get from it is PR points. There's no good scientific basis to go to the moon. Now, I thought it was interesting, and I thought it was worth mentioning that in light of the Falcon Heavy launch that just happened.
Yeah.
The moon, the aim, Kennedy's speech, we should go to the moon and return an astronaut safely from the Earth before the end of this decade. It grabbed people's imaginations because it's exciting and it's something tangible, and we're like, that's amazingly cool. Yeah. He's quite right. There was very limited scientific benefit from sending someone to go and walk on the moon. But firing the imagination and developing all that technology and just that sense of achievement is worthwhile in of itself. And I just thought...
Can I just mention one thing that he said in his speech? It was, along the lines of, if we don't go, we guarantee that we won't win. If we go, at least we'll be striving to be the first on the moon. And if we don't get that, then, at least we tried.
I believe this, I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but I think the quote you're referring to, he says, if we don't try, we're guaranteed to... No, he goes, if we try, we might fail.
Yeah.
But if we don't try, we're guaranteed to lose.
Yeah.
And absolutely. And I think that's very important to remember. But one of the things Kennedy did at this point is he just captured the imagination of the public that, yes, we should do this. Again, I'm a huge fan of Project Apollo, and I think it was a huge benefit. But Wisner is correct. It is of questionable scientific value, just the process, just coming back with moon rocks. That in of itself they could have done, and I think they did do with remote probes.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show there is more to science and exploration than just the pure science. You still need to capture the imagination, like launching a cherry red roadster in a heliocentric orbit.
Yeah, you need to capture the imagination, don't you? Sometimes robots bringing dirt back isn't going to capture the imagination as much as putting a man up there.
No, it's really not. We then find out just the scale of what they have to do. I mean, today, we think going to space is pretty ordinary. I mean, there was a launch last week, there was a launch in 5 days, and then a launch a week after that, done by a private company, not counting whatever the Chinese, the Russians, the Japanese, the Indians, the French, or the US themselves are going to launch. At this point, all the Americans had managed to do was send Shepard into space for 15 minutes.
Yeah,
that was how long.
That's all it was as well.
Yeah, it wasn't even into orbit. It was a 15-minute. He stuck his nose out and came back down. And I really like they get the overhead projector and they basically list all of the problems that we have to do. What we have to understand here is the entire US space program, pretty much from conception until 1969, was focused on one thing. And that one thing was getting a man on the moon.
Yeah.
And they go, these are the problems we have to do. We have to get a man into orbit. We have to do an EVA, we're not going to go and just, look out the window. We're going to walk around. We know we have to rendezvous with a second spacecraft to get out there. We're going to have to dock with that spacecraft, and then we're going to have to do a long journey. It's 2 weeks there and back. And I just like how stark it is, with this ... 5 checkpoint items. But each one of themselves is just a massive undertaking. when you consider they'd never done any of it before.
That's right, yeah. I like the analogy that he said about throwing a tennis ball over his house and you trying to hit it with a rock.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay. I think a tennis ball and a rock are kind of overemphasizing things because, yeah, it's going to be a lot smaller than that.
A lot smaller, going a lot faster.
Yeah, exactly. But it's refreshing to see that, okay, they need to get into orbit, but they've poked their nose up, but they haven't stayed there. And so they need to know how to control it. They know how to control it to a certain extent because they poked their nose up, and he did have to fire, Alan Shepard did have to fire retro rockets to slow his speed to drop him back into an ascent.
Well, they wanted to. They knew they weren't fast enough to get into orbit, so it was going to come down regardless. But they wanted it to land in the ocean.
Yeah.
So they wanted to control it in that sense. In addition, the reason they had the thing with the retro packs on the bottom is it was such a slapdash, like hurried spacecraft. The retro rocket pack on the back had to be ejected so that the heat shield would be free to help it land. And that's just I believe one of them actually landed with it still in place because they were worried about some damage. Again, I haven't watched From the Earth to the Moon in a while. Not From the Earth to the Moon, The Right Stuff in a while.
Right.
But each one of those missions in of itself could have been an episode of a series. Because each one they learn, quite famously, Gus Grissom, who is a character we will meet later on in this episode, his Mercury mission, when he landed, the explosive bolts fired accidentally, and it flooded the capsule and it sank. And it was only recovered in the 1990s.
Yeah, well, I think we find that out next episode, don't we?
Yeah, there's a little bit goes on about that in the next one. But again, that's a discussion for next week.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So yeah, what we get next is the introduction of the next 9. Because we had the original Mercury 7 astronauts. So it's Al Shepard, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Wally Schirra, Deke Slayton, who didn't actually fly in space until much, much later. He was grounded for a medical condition.
Yep.
And so he became effectively the head of the astronaut corps in terms of dealing out the flight assignments.
Right. It wasn't the measles, was it?
It was not. It was a heart fibrillation is what they called it.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And doesn't everyone's heart fibrillate?
Yeah.
Can I just say, if we should have really introduced ourselves as a Max Peck.
We really should have done. we missed a trick there. I don't know the accuracy or, the truth behind that. It has a ring of truth to it, though. And I quite like that guy at the hotel. You got to imagine he's thinking, oh, I imagine this is some real kinky stuff going on up there. I
don't know. I don't know whether that actually happened or not, but I like to think he was probably approached by someone high up and, okay, right, you're the only person that needs to know. And he's just gleeful with joy as the fact that he knows exactly what's going on and nobody else does, and he is in control of that.
Oh, that bit when Lovell arrives and, he's like, no, that's me, old Max Peck. And the woman's just like, I don't think so. It's not in the book.
I'm good old Max Peck. He's checking it.
He is. I didn't think he was Lovell at first. I thought he looks like an Armstrong. I don't know why I say that. Because in my mind, if Jim Lovell's not Jim Lovell, he's Tom Hanks. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's the problem with going from Apollo 13 to this is you're changing all faces. It's like a new season of a really cheap soap opera. But all of a sudden, they've changed some people.
But not all faces, because some of the people working in NASA were flight controllers and stuff in Apollo 13. Because I know the one who's doing the list of, we need to do this, need to do this, need to do this, was in Apollo 13 as well. So it's this weird disconnect. It's like some people have been recast and some haven't. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, but that is a nice little thing. That is because in the mission briefing that we had where they said about the orbiter and the EVA, etc., they said that they do need a new set of astronauts.
Yeah.
And this happened, it's dated in this program as 1962.
Mm-hmm.
So then we skip forward, I know it's to 1963, and you've already got the Russians have sent up a man to walk in space, haven't they?
Alexei Leonov, yes. Yeah. And if you're a fan of 2010, the Russian ship in that was named after him.
Oh,
so there
was
you
it?
go. It was.
Okay.
But yes, Alexei Leonov, first man to walk in space. And again, you know, it's they're literally like pulling wheelies in front of the Americans here, the Russians. It's like, hey!
Well, America has had a bit of a setback as well because their president has been assassinated.
Yes.
And that has kind of taken priority for a little while. And I suppose they're all worried about all their funding as well, aren't they?
Well, and we find that out later on when they're talking about the accident that killed, who was it?
That killed Elliot C. and Charles Bassant.
Yeah. I know a little bit about that because they were flying T-38 jet trainers.
Yeah,
which they would fly.
That.
It's just a small twin engine. They still use them today as their training aircraft.
Yeah.
And they were just flying to go and inspect the spacecraft that they were going to do. It was cloudy, and coming in for landing, he got unsighted, lost control, and I believe they collided. And part of the debris actually landed on the building and nearly damaged the spacecraft as well. Fortunately, no one on the ground was killed, but yeah, 2 astronauts were killed without ever getting into space.
Yeah.
And I think they're actually listed on the astronaut memorial wall because although they didn't go into space, they were astronauts and they were killed in the line of duty, as it were.
Well, they're part of the program, aren't they?
Absolutely. And again, these guys were training very close to each other. I mean, they were only a few weeks, maybe a couple of months away from the actual mission.
Yeah. Well, these are the 2 that are sent around doing promotions, aren't they?
2, there was quite a few of them which were, but yeah.
So these 2, we saw later on in the episode that these are the guys that are sent round, and they're not. I suppose they're not looking for the glory, but you can see, especially on Elliot C's face, when one of the teachers comes up to him and says, "Oh, you know Alan Shepard, but it let us know when you get into space, and I'm sure we'll be proud of you, and we'll get all the kids to watch you." And there's a kind of, I'm not there yet, am I?
Well, it's strange today to think of some of these people as being effectively nobodies. Because Al Shepard was the first man into space, John Glenn was the first to do an orbit. So they were kind of like the ones who had captured the public's imagination. They were, again, the first. Strangely enough today, though, if you go and ask someone to name 3 astronauts, I think you struggle to get naming anyone past maybe Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin.
Yeah. The problem nowadays, these are test pilots, and they're at the real cutting edge of the space program. They are at the absolute tip of the iceberg. Nowadays, astronauts are / scientists.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with. And that's not to take away from scientists and the important role that they do wherever they are around the globe. But they're scientists and not poster boys, whereas people that are test pilots, they're risk takers, aren't they? They put their lives on the line so other people can step forward.
I mean, I think that's more just a tragic reflection on what society places value on more than anything else. Because, I mean, you're quite right. Test pilots, people that put their lives in danger. That there's a line in The Martian where Mark Watney's going, "I sometimes wonder what would an Apollo astronaut do in my situation." I mean, he goes, he'd probably drink 3 whiskey sours, jump in his open-top Corvette, drive to the launch pad, jump into a command module smaller than my rover, and fly to the moon and back. And it's like, yeah, that is kind of what they would do. But at the end of the day, I really think these guys paved the way. They were important. You needed those test pilots to do those first few steps.
Yeah.
But, I mean, for example, only one actual scientist landed on the moon. Only one geologist out of 20 people, was it in total? No, it'd be 12 people, I think 12 people walked on the moon.
Right.
Only one of them was a scientist.
And that was towards the very end as well, wasn't it?
It was the very last one. He was actually moved forward onto Apollo 17 because Apollo 18 was cancelled. And even so, a mission of questionable scientific value, they only sent a scientist on the last one because that's where their priorities were. So it is kind of a shame that society as a whole doesn't hold the scientists in that same level of esteem. I think we should, but we just don't.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's the lizard hindbrain for you, I suppose.
Yeah.
So where were we? Yeah, John, these guys just, they're not viewed as real scientists unless they've actually been into space, you know? You know, and they say, oh, well, you know, he just hasn't been up yet. And you've got the guy with a cigar saying, he's no more an astronaut than I am.
And then he goes off and gets Woody Woodpecker to explain it to everyone.
Yeah. Now,
they're like children there, aren't they?
I want to know, I think those are real. I want to know if you can still get those.
I think they're real. They might even be out of copyright as well.
Hang on, let's just have a quick look.
Because I know Popeye's out of copyright now, isn't he?
Ah, yes, they're on YouTube.
Oh, are they?
I will send you these later to stick in the show notes.
Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, I mean, these were commissioned by NASA, you know, to help fund, to help public awareness. I mean, in fact, Werner von Braun, when he was trying to build the case for going to the moon, he went to Disney and they did a special where he explained the vision of the lunar landings to get the public excited so they would support it. Because, again, it costs a lot of money.
Well, it's a way of getting through to every age available, isn't it? The kids are shown the Woody Woodpecker and they lap it up. But also the adults, when, Charles turns around and says, do you know what? I've brought someone along who can explain this a little bit better than me. And he puts Woody Woodpecker on for the adults. And they're enjoying it, if not more, than the children. Now, we know from other films, i.e. Jurassic Park, they use animation and cartoons to get their point across, don't they?
Mr. DNA.
Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. And it explained the bloody whole plot of that film.
Yeah.
Really easy for everyone from a kid going to see that film up until the oldest adult in the cinema.
Uh-huh.
And so it's a really simple thing that it captures kids' imaginations and adults' attention.
Oh yeah, no, very much so. And I've seen bits and snippets of these old things, but it's like the Disney used to do those World of Tomorrow skits, those little videos where you had like sort of the City of Tomorrow. I love watching those. They're just fascinating to see what people used to think the future would be like.
Oh yeah, everything's plated in silver, isn't it?
Oh yeah, flying cars, all that kind of jazz.
Yeah. So we reach a pinnacle where we have Gemini 4 as well, don't we? In June 3rd, 1965.
So Project Gemini, which is kind of like the unloved middle child of the US space program.
Why is that though?
Well, because Mercury is the first men in space for the US. Apollo is the first man on the moon. Gemini is just, I say just, it's doing all of the stuff to let you get to Apollo. But because of that, people just aren't given the chance to really understand the science. I don't want to say they did a poor job of communicating it, but it was just difficult to grasp in the everyday sort of sense if you weren't already interested in it, you know?
Well, it's the test bed, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because it wasn't setting any big headline-grabbing events. You know, it wasn't the first man in space. It wasn't the first man in orbit. It wasn't the first man to the moon. So because of that, it just doesn't capture the public's imagination in the same way. Which is a shame because, A, I really like the Gemini spacecraft. It's kind of cool. The amount of science and learning they did with these spacecraft is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. It was the first US spacewalk. It was the first multi-crew ship launched, so that's where you have 2 pilots. Whereas all the Vostocks, I believe, were just 1. It was the Voskhds, which weren't much bigger, had 3 people in, which was weird. Right. It was the first rendezvous in space, where 2 spacecraft met with each other, and the first docking in space, where a Gemini docked with the what do they call this? The Agena, was it?
Yeah,
Agena?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, the Agena, which was part of. I believe it was launched separately, and then it docked into it, and they could do science and stuff. But again, the main purpose was just to dock, to say, hey, yes, we can do these things, and they're learning the entire time, and it's just kind of fascinating. Again, it's not a huge amount bigger than the Mercury capsules, and it looks quite similar. I like the fact this has got a proper second stage with all the engine units and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking down the list of astronauts for the Gemini. Is it Gemini or Gemini? I get confused because I would pronounce it Gemini, but
I think we'd pronounce it Gemini because we're British and we speak correctly. But those filthy Americans would call it Gemini.
Goddamn filthy Americans.
Damn you. Damn. Don't you speak the Queen's English, sir?
Yeah, shame on you. Shame on you.
Yes, quite. But yeah, the list of pilots of Gemini missions is a who's who of NASA. Because, you've got Gus Grissom, Neil Armstrong, Pete Conrad, Jim Lovell, Buzz Aldrin, all of these guys flying these missions.
Yep. Michael Collins, Ed White, David Scott as well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
I mean, I think you'll find that...
is this... is this where the Liberty Bell capsule came from?
No, Liberty Bell was one of the Mercury capsules.
Right, okay.
So named because he thought it looked like a bell.
Exactly, yeah. Didn't they paint a crack on it as well?
I think they did.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah, I think they did. It's on display, I think, in Kansas, in the Cosmodrome there.
Right.
Yeah, it was Liberty Bell 7 was the capsule. And man looked something on the internet to see if it did have a crack painted on it. Yes, it did. There you go.
Yeah, I'm sure it did, yeah.
Yeah. So... but Gemini missions, and again, we get the first American spacewalk with Ed White on Gemini 4. It was during the Gemini missions, there was the crash, and the crew of Gemini 9 died. And again, it highlights the importance of having backup crews then. So, yes, if for whatever reason your prime crew can't fly, you can still fly the mission.
Yeah.
Because of it, because, again, that's still quite important.
Can I just go back one little bit?
Yeah.
Do you remember in Apollo 13 you said about it was important to have an astronaut relaying information to the crew themselves?
Capcom, yes.
Yeah, that's right. On this Gemini 4, we had Gus Grissom.
Yeah.
Relaying stuff to Ed White.
Trying to relay stuff to Ed White.
Yeah, he kind of didn't want to come back in, did he?
Can't imagine why. he was having too much fun, it would seem.
Oh, well, okay, model worker as well. I thought that looked glorious.
Oh, no, absolutely. That one looks really cool. Any of the stuff of a spacecraft in flight looks really good. And we've got the proper Houston mission control here.
Yeah.
With the big board, with the orbital tracks listed on there. And that's just kind of cool.
Yeah. No,
yeah,
that's very cool.
I like seeing all of that stuff, which was cool. Interesting thing I just wanted to note. Did you notice the flight controller with a British accent?
Oh. No, okay, no.
Oh, but basically, I just thought it was interesting because the first time I watched this, there's a flight controller there with a very proper British accent. And I remember thinking, well, that's strange. You'd think they'd get an American to play this. But no, there was actually a British flight director was there.
Was this John Hodge?
This is John Hodge, yeah.
Right, okay.
Who was a British aerospace engineer who then worked on the Canadian Arrow project, which is just I'm not getting into that whole thing there. But then after that, he went and worked with NASA, and he was with NASA until 1967 as a flight director. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting. I go, oh, look, there you go.
See, they can't leave the British alone. They we're always the bad guys, but yet, we have situations of power as well.
Keep stealing our best and brightest, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Never mind. But yeah, he was actually the flight director for Apollo 1, so we will be visiting him again in the next-ish episode. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting note to have there. But yeah, we get a look at, I believe it's Gemini 8, with Neil Armstrong and, is that Dave Scott?
David Scott, yeah.
Yeah. And the interesting thing here is it was, the docking went ahead pretty straightforward, but it developed a malfunction. One of the orbital engines kept pulsing on, and they couldn't figure out what had caused this. So they had to undock, and the spacecraft entered into a very violent spin. And, it was very real risk. They could have lost the spacecraft, but Armstrong was very cool under cover, under pressure, as it were, and he overcame it. And it was also, they landed not where they were supposed to be. So it was like the first emergency landing.
Yeah.
I think it was that showed he was the right person to command Apollo 11, because he would sacrifice a mission for the safety of the crew rather than the glory.
That's the RCS, isn't it?
Well, the RCS is Reaction Control System.
Yep.
And I don't know why the flight rules were once they start using it, it's mission over, but basically you use the RCS to orientate yourself for your landing. So once they started using that, they must have figured that, okay, we need to land now, because if we use up all the RCS, we can't position ourselves for landing.
Yeah, well, I think it makes sense.
Oh, no, absolutely it makes sense.
Also, you couldn't have a better pilot on board in this sort of situation as well with Neil Armstrong, because you had, wasn't he one of the only people, the gyroscope things that you sit in with the 3 rings and it spins?
Oh, yeah?
I think he was one of the only people to be able to gain control of that situation.
Okay.
I'm sure it was him, that he was one of the only astronauts to gain control of that situation.
I mean, all of the astronauts were, as we've said, test pilots at this point. And I know Neil Armstrong had been part of the X-15 flight project, which is still, I think, the fastest jet, like fixed-wing aircraft in the world.
Right.
In terms of, for pure speed records.
That's the one they drop from a plane, isn't it?
Yeah, they drop it like a bomb out of a B-52. It ignites a rocket motor.
And then clears off.
So much so. In fact, I believe a couple of the pilots on that were awarded astronaut wings because they technically entered space in it. So yeah, one of the guys, something Walker, Joseph Walker, he got astronaut wings because he went high enough after being registered as being into space.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just kind of a cool little fact. X-15s are very cool.
Oh, they are. Yeah, they're. Oh, yeah, man. They just look awesome, don't they? The tiny little wheels as well as they come into land. It's just ridiculous. How do they stay up there?
Well, it's basically the biggest engine they could get, stick a cockpit and a couple of teeny wings on it and call it good.
Yeah, it is a missile, isn't it?
Oh, literally is. Even down to being dropped like one.
Yeah.
So yeah, they have to do an emergency landing. They land in the South China Sea, and it takes a little while for the ship to get to them. So they get a little bit seasick.
Yeah, and share a sick bag as well.
Yeah, I was questioning that a little bit. I was like, ooh.
Yeah, I would have thought, pass the bag and smelling someone else's honk would just be, oh, no, I can't do that.
Bear in mind, though, some of these missions, Gemini 7? Gemini 7, that lasted 13 days.
Really?
Yeah. Because it was part to test it. Now, I don't know if you've seen the Gemini capsules. Not a huge amount of space for doing anything other than sitting there.
No, they don't do much else, do they? There's very little room in them.
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure what they happen, but I mean, yeah, I can't imagine that would have been any fun at all.
No, they're almost shaped to the astronauts. It's kind of shrink wrapped around them, isn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure at that point sharing a sick bag was the least of their concerns.
Yeah, they've seen everything, isn't it? It's like mothers and sons.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just looking here. Yeah, Gemini 4 was a 4-day mission. Gemini 5 was a 7-day mission. 7 was a 13-day mission. And then after that, 1 day, 3 day, 2 day, 2 day, and 3 days. So yeah, whatever happens, they're pooping in those suits.
But all of them, the time of doing this, they're clocking up the hours, aren't they? Because if we cast our minds back a little bit, they wanted hours up in space.
They said they needed thousands of hours in space before they could attempt a lunar landing. They currently had 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't think they got thousands and thousands of hours.
They certainly, I mean, every mission of Gemini, they were learning something new.
Mm.
They were pushing the science forward, and that was important. So, I mean, again, Gemini 4 was the first spacewalk. Gemini 5 was the first week-long mission, the first use of fuel cells, and the first use of the advanced guidance and navigation systems to allow them to do the rendezvous. Mm-hmm. Gemini 7 was the first attempt to do a docking, but it failed. But they did try and stay in space for 2 weeks, because if you're going to go to the moon and back, you've got to be in space for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Gemini 8 was the first successful docking, although it was aborted because of the problems with the orbital control system. Gemini 9 was another rendezvous with the Agena. Gemini 10 was another rendezvous. It was also a docking maneuver. 49 minutes of EVA.
Nice.
You know, it's each one is just learning a little bit more, and a little bit more, a little bit more, so that when it gets to the Apollo missions, they've got the base to work on. Because again, these missions are flying while they're designing the Apollo capsules, Apollo service modules. So, you know, they're taking all this feedback in. So that's kind of really interesting and really special. There's a channel on YouTube called Vintage Space. And it's worth checking out if you're interested in this sort of era of spaceflight, because the host, and I've completely blanked on her name, so I'm going to find it, but she gives really good, like, little snippet talks about what's going on with the Mercury and the Gemini and the Apollo missions and everything like that.
Right.
It is Amy Shearer title. I probably butchered that, but anyway, go and check it out. Vintage Space. Just type it into YouTube. Well worth a quick watch. And yeah, it's a fascinating era where, again, these guys were effectively crawling into literally tin cans slightly larger than themselves, strapping onto an ICBM and being hurtled into space.
Yeah, and it culminates in Gemini 12, doesn't it?
Yeah, so Gemini 12, which is Buzz Aldrin and...
Lovell, isn't it?
Yes, Lovell and Aldrin.
Yeah.
And that was the final one. Again, it was another docking with the Agena, keeping station with it during an EVA. Aldrin set an EVA record of 5 hours and 30 minutes for one spacewalk.
That's just Aldrin turning around and saying, nope, not coming in. Nope, not coming in.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
I seem to remember there was a problem with his spacewalk, though. I can't remember what it was, but I definitely saw somewhere he was having problems, I think, with overheating.
Okay. In his suit itself?
In the suit itself, yeah. It might not have been
I can't see anything here, but...
Now, I might be misremembering it. I might be thinking of someone else, but I do know at one point someone had a problem with a space mission. But still, again, he went out there. It was out there for a long time. This is where we have the flakiest CG of the episode. It's got to be said.
Yeah, this is Aldrin kind of rodeoing his units.
Oh, it's really bad.
Well, it's like it hasn't got any texture on it. There's no textures, or it doesn't seem like there's any textures.
Well, you can see when he moves his arm, finger quoting arm there, it kind of clips the rest of the model as well.
Right.
And maybe it's because I have a background in the CG, but I'm just seeing this and I'm just going, oh, that's just not good.
Well, yeah, it's the thing that got me with it is the way that he's sat on them.
Yeah,
it looks kind. I'm not saying that he didn't do it like that. I'm sure if I was out there, I'd kind of saddle it up like that as well and just wave my arm around in the air going yeehaw. But it's the way it pans into the helmet. And you know the reason, does that. Yeah. You know the reason why he's got his sun visor down. It's not because of the sun. It's because they can't texture faces.
Well, it does that really bad kind of fades the eyes in as well.
Oh.
And it's a little bit cringeworthy.
That would look good in the 60s.
Oh, that'd be mind-blowing in the 60s.
Yeah. And then we'd just turn around and say, well, they didn't have the technology, did they? But now we've had some pretty good motion pictures. I'm sure they haven't got the budget that they would have nowadays. But
I mean, can I just take a moment as well and say, look, this was 1998, 99.
Yeah.
And that looks dodgy as hell. How do people actually think they faked the moon landings if that's the best they can do? I mean, come on now.
I saw a new video of that, someone saying about it being faked.
They make me angry. They legitimately piss me off.
They're flipping idiots, aren't they? They really are.
I know. Not going to get started on it. We'll save it for the next Shonky Lab on it.
Yeah. If you are listening to this and you do believe that all the moon landings were faked, please let us know.
No, don't. In fact, you're not allowed to listen to this anymore. You're barred. I'm barring you.
Okay. I want to hear from you. Go along to the Shonky Lab group and let us know that you don't believe that we went to the moon. Please. I'll have you on the show and let's have a little discussion. I won't slag you off. I won't be horrible or anything like that. I'm genuinely interested. So
direct all your comments on that to him, because if you message me, I will find you. I will come. So that kind of brings us to the end of the Gemini missions and getting ready for Apollo, where you have a really nice scene where Deke Slayton calls all the astronauts into the room, and he says that very profound thing, and he says, the first man to walk on the moon is in this room right now.
Oh, he's looking at me.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's brilliant.
Oh, can you imagine that, though? He's sitting there, one of the people in this room will be the first man to walk on the moon. That's just a bit mind-blowing, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's such a good series, and this is just such a good foundation. At the end of this, everyone is pretty much, we're all up to speed. We know where we are now. We're ready for Apollo. We're ready for the story to start proper, if you will.
Yeah, what I like about this, and especially the scene with everyone around the table, is that they're talking about, okay, the people looking and going to be first and second on the moon are looking at me, and then the third and fourth people and the fifth and sixth person are looking at me. It's just presuming that the Russians are nowhere in this race now. That's
true. But I think at that point they kind of knew they'd managed to get some momentum. I think there was a bit more confidence within themselves that things were going okay. What I don't think any of them realized at that time is the last man to walk on the moon was probably in there with them too.
Oh, yeah, don't tell them that.
No, just to bring everyone down to earth with a bit of a nasty bump there. But yeah, I think it's such a strange concept there. It's just like mind blown.
Yeah. Could we say that all the people that walk on the moon are in that room?
Oh yeah. All of the Apollo astronauts, I believe, were part. Because again, by that point, you have the third group as well. I don't think any of the. I don't think any astronauts who joined after 1965 went into the Apollo program.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong. as we say in all of our podcasts, neither of us are experts. We're just very enthusiastic idiots.
Exactly, yes.
So please just bear that in mind before sending us angry emails. But still, I do feel everyone in that room, in there you've got the crews of Apollos 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, and presumably 18 through 20 as the original plan was.
Yeah. It was going to be a busy old time, wasn't it?
It really was. Yeah, I mean, that's the point. Some of the people in that room would not have gotten to the moon because their missions would have been cancelled.
Yeah.
And also, tragically, 3 people in that room would die.
Yeah.
So there you go. But still, I think just as an introduction to this series and a little soupçon of the early space race, it works very well. Like I said, if you want to know more about specific bits, check out The Right Stuff, which is a film. It stars Ed Harris. Who else is in that?
Is that the one with Clint Eastwood as well? No, that's Space Truckers or something, isn't it?
I think you're thinking of Space Cowboys.
Yeah, that's
very very different film, if I'm honest. But yeah, The Right Stuff, which deals with the Mercury 7 astronauts. It's a very good film. Do check that out. There's also Space Race TV show, much like From the Earth to the Moon, which was on the BBC in 2005. And that deals with both the American and the Soviet early space race, and has a lot of information there. Both well worth checking out and giving a look.
I certainly will do. Don't worry about that.
Good man. Glad to hear it. Anything else you can think of?
No. Do you know what? I think this is a really good introduction to the series itself. Like you say, it's brought everyone up to speed. And now we can go ahead with the Apollo missions. And yeah, the Gemini was kind of the workhorse which led on to the Apollo missions, wasn't it? So there's lots of science to be done and lots of testing to be done, but really the nuts and bolts of everything and the big cojones are really in the Apollo, aren't they?
Well, yeah.
They're the poster boys.
Well, yeah, the Mercury was the proof of concept, if you will. The Gemini was the testbed workhorse, and then, like you say, Apollo is the open top corvette.
Certainly is, yeah. But I'm looking forward to the rest of it now.
Oh, good. I'm very glad. Yeah, it's going to be it's a really fascinating series. It doesn't have that same familiarity that you get with Band of Brothers, but the actors who are in this, who feature in episode, they're the same ones. So the same guy playing Gus Grissom here will play him in the next one. The same one playing Jim Lovell here plays them in the later ones as well.
Right.
So that's great. And a lot of the ground crew are very familiar. One thing I don't think either of us mentioned, but I will do here, is they have a framing device in that news reporter at the beginning. I can't remember the name of the actor.
Okay.
But he's a fictional character who kind of serves as an additional framing device. So when they need to try and get additional information across to you, they use him.
He's the audience, is he?
He's more the course.
Right.
He's the one who kind of just tells you this is what's going on, this is why this is important, this is why it's relevant. And he features throughout the series as well. Kind of like Walter Cronkite did in Apollo 13, but Walter Cronkite is a real person.
Exactly, yeah. But also, some of the episodes in this series, I'm right in remembering, some are very different layout, yes. Different style as well, isn't it?
Different tones as well. I mean, this one is the first one. This is directed by Tom Hanks as well, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, some of them are better than others. Not going to argue that. But I think all of them, in their own way, bring something to the series as a whole. So at the end of it, I mean, one thing I think you can say about Band of Brothers, as much as I love it, but you do get a sense where it kind of runs into each other.
Yep.
Outside of certain key scenes and moments, it feels like it kind of blurs into one whole thing. Whereas with this, it's very much a case of, oh, this is this episode and it's in this style, and then this is this episode and it's in this style. And they're a lot more distinct in that way.
Yeah, I think that can help sometimes. and also hinder in other times. But I'm hoping that it will help for the majority, because it is separate stages along the journey, isn't it?
Well, each Apollo mission is its own story. Can I just also, and I forgot to mention this at the top, but I adore the soundtrack in this show.
Yeah, it's really good, isn't it?
It's so good, and the titles at the beginning, the introduction, where you're panning over the spacesuit and you're getting little glimpses of things like the fire and the first launch and everything, and it's so powerful, isn't it?
Do we get that on every episode? That kind of intro?
They use the same intro in each episode. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Oh yes. So yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to the rest of this journey.
Good man. So am I.
Cool. I think that's as good a spot as any to hang up. Would you say?
Yeah. Why not? Let's. Should we plug our stuff? Might as well while we're here.
You know what? You can find us both in the same place for the most part.
Yeah.
Just go to rogue2media.com.
Yep.
Everything on there is great. Just go check it out. There'll be something to delight all tastes, all palates.
Yeah, that's right. Can also plug the blackdogpodcast.com as well. Pop along.
Absolutely. Fantastic film reviews there. And we'll have to bully Lee into doing the right stuff at some point.
Yeah, why not? I'll let you do that.
Yeah, okay. From a safe distance, perhaps. And I'll also just plug the Great Derelict, which this week you can hear me and Elton again.
Oh,
we were talking
Jesus.
about...
It's us again.
It's us again. I know. This is why people think we're interchangeable.
Yeah.
But we spoke about the recent Falcon Heavy launch, with Elon Musk launching his Cherry Red Roadster into a heliocentric orbit. And yeah, you can just find that on the iTunes and on Facebook. If you just go do a search for Great Derelict, I'll send Elton a link and he can stick it in places as well. So there you go.
That's cool.
So, there you go. I think we're done.
Okay, cool. Well, and until next week. No, sorry, it won't be next week, will it?
Until next time.
I'm trying to think of an outro now. I'll let you think of it. You're driving this one.
I'm driving this one.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, I'll get back to you next week. But in the meantime, I should go.